My name is Alan Cho, and I'm the Festival Director of LiterASIAN. Welcome back in person, in the flesh. I didn't know how long it would take, but I'm really glad that we're able to be here, gathering in person. I also want to say Happy Mother's Day as well to all the mothers. I was so busy that got flowers for all the mothers-in-laws, and then Valerie, my wife, said, "What about me?" And I thought, oh gosh, so I'll be getting flowers a little bit later. So that reminds me to say Happy Mother's Day to everyone. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. We're honored to be here in Chinatown today. This is another year of LiterASIAN Festival. This is the 10th anniversary of a festival. Please give a hand up. We've come a long way since 2013 when we launched our first festival in Chinatown. Many of you in the audience were there for that first one. Thank you for continuing to support us and being with us from day one. And if Jim Wong Chu were here today, he's the festival founder. I know that he's in spirit. He would be very, very happy to see everyone here enjoying each other's presence in person again. I want to take the opportunity to thank our volunteer team. Please give a round of applause to our wonderful volunteer team. I'd like to thank Lorraine Lowe, the Executive Director of the Yat-Sen Garden. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you for always keeping Chinatown in the news. There's so many opportunities for us to be forgotten, and you've always tweeted us out. You've always alarmed the media about what is happening in Chinatown. Thank you. I feel that you're the unofficial mayor of Chinatown. Thank you. Thanks to you and Bruno for hosting us, and the rest of the festival, rest of the garden team as well. I want to thank Cindy Chan Piper, our artistic director. Cindy's really vision for this year's festival, the theme, the speakers, many of the details. It's Cindy's vision. Thank you, Cindy. Our festival coordinator, Sophie Monk. Sophie has handled all the details of the festival. Many of the things that we don't see that make it so organized. It's because of Sophie. Thank you, Sophie, for keeping us in order. And in addition, I want to thank the ACWW Board of Directors as well. A lot of them are here. Ada Khan, Todd Wong, our president of ACWW. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Lisa, at the back of there as well. Lisa, thank you for being one of our directors and keeping us in check all the time as well. Making sure that we're in the right direction, go in the right direction. Thank you to all our board of directors. I want to thank our partners and funders, BC Arts Council, the Copyright Access Foundation, Yat-Sen Garden, Classical Chinese Garden, the Chinatown Storytelling Center, Center A Art Gallery, the PCHC Museum of Migration, Rice Paper Magazine, Simon Fraser University Writers Studio, Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Society Exploration, Iron Dog Bookstore, Marlene Enns for her guidance and support. And thank you to the publishers who provide the authors' books. Go get them while they last. They're at the back of the room, so lots of chance for you to get some books. Before I hand the stage over to our moderator today, I'd like to introduce this very important person, who's an author, a good friend of mine, and also one of the champions of diversity and Asian Canadian writers. Julia Lin was born in Taiwan and lived there in Vietnam before her family immigrated to Canada when she was 9. Since then, Julia has lived in Vancouver and its environment, in Toronto, and northern British Columbia, and of course, here in Vancouver. She holds a graduate degree in immunology, a Master of Science at the University of Toronto, and a postgraduate degree in computer education from the University of British Columbia. And she has taught high school in math and science in British Columbia for a number of years now. Her writing mentor, M.G. Fasanji, encouraged her to complete the short story collection miah after she submitted the first stories in the 2009 Humber Creative Writing Program. She was the treasurer of the Writers' Union of Canada from 2016 to 2020, and is a past board member of the Vancouver Public Library, as well as the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop. Julia is currently serving a 2-year term as the first vice chair of the Writers' Union of Canada. In 2023, she will become the first Asian woman to serve as chair. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass the stage over to Julia.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to keep my mask on, not because I'm going to be rude, but because my dad is vulnerable and he lives with us. So I just don't want to put people at risk. So pardon me for keeping my mask on for the entire thing, but you can imagine me smiling under this thing, okay? All right. So we have three wonderful authors with us today, and we're going to hear them read. And for each one, I will introduce them, give their bio, and then they'll do the reading. And then I will, because I will ask them questions after their readings, and then I'll turn the questions over to the audience afterwards. Okay? So, and we do have a special guest coming later, but you'll have to wait and see who it is. Okay, so I'm going to do the order just so that you guys know. I'm going to start with Jamie and then Wayne and then Chuck, if that's okay. All right? So, first up is Jamie Liu. She is the author of, thank you, of Dandelion, which was the winner of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop Jim Wong Chu Emerging Writers Award this year. And well done, Jamie, right? Jamie's accomplished. She's a lawyer, a law professor, and a podcaster specializing in immigration, refugee, and citizenship law. Her podcast is called Migration Conversations, and it features experts and migrants who have experienced the immigration system up close. She has some of my heritage. She's got Hakka, Hainanese, and Noya roots in Southeast Asia, and one of her pastimes is to cook and eat South Asian hawker fare, including laksa, and I'll probably say this wrong, but ja gui jiao. Oh, is that right? Okay. It's pretty close to Taiwanese, so it's not bad. Okay. She lives in Ottawa with her family, and you can find her on Twitter and Instagram. Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for the invitation, and also I'm just really honored to be in community with Chuck and Wayne and with all of you today. I'm going to be doing two bifurcated readings from the book, one from the beginning and one from the middle. The book is about a young woman who becomes a new mother and starts to think about her own mother who disappeared when she was a young girl, and reflects on why her mother might have left, and goes on a journey to find her. Whenever Mother regaled us with fantastical tales of her exotic birthplace, bursting with the sultry equatorial heat, the mangrove's briny clutch, the sweetness of the rambutan, the sharp spiciness of fresh galangal, and the salty shrimp paste, Father brought my mind back to the Rockies, reminding me that I had never been to the beaches and rainforests of Brunei. Draped with shawls of coniferous trees strewn with silver rocks and capped with snowy barrettes, the mountains surrounded us in Sparwood. We worked in them, played on them, and lived among them. We could never escape them. My father told me that the mountains reminded him only of work. He gazed sadly at the belly of the mountain where the coal mine was squinting, drawing on a cigarette. The mine's smokestacks, 4 of them crowning the mountain, resembled the cigarette perched between his lips, its ashes building like the coal waste pushed from the mountain's burning innards. Father spoke with such sullenness about working in the mine that I imagined the mountain casting a shadow on his face, like a ghost clinging to his stubble. To my mother, the mountains were the walls of a prison. They contracted like an accordion, teasing her by giving her space, and then rapidly closing. She grumbled that Father had promised her excitement and adventure in a modern city, that he hadn't thought of her when he brought her to this secluded town. It didn't help when I pointed out the sound of the trains echoing in the valley. Nobody knows we are here. I can't die here, she would vow. Nobody knew you lived in the Sultanate of Brunei before either, Father reminded her. It's better to die here than rot in the heat back home. It was as if they were pollen that was lifted by the wind and landed in this place where the air quieted, unplanned, unprepared, planting themselves in the soil they did not choose. So I'm just reading another portion at the back end of the book when the main character goes to Southeast Asia to try to find out where her mother is. Nestled between the limestone mountains was the town of Ipoh. Although its glory days of the boom from the tin mines were behind it, the city was still charming. Settled in the urban valley were low buildings with a colonial touch, their age betraying them. The windows of the buildings looked bruised and battered, their wooden shutters faded and warped from the heat. I imagined a shiny and vibrant array of colors among the buildings in Ipoh's heyday. The various gowns each building had donned, now revealed through layers of paint that flecked off the edifices because of the monsoon rains, revealing old and older hues from a different time. Money from the tin mines, as well as the members of the Hakka Miners Club, had long fled. I wondered if there had been another girl like me who had looked out of the back window of her car, saying goodbye to her hometown when her father lost his job at the mine. During her childhood among the Pink Mountains, did she know Ipoh was in danger of becoming a ghost town? The next day I found myself wandering in the old town of Ipoh. The colonial buildings flanking the Pink Mountains reminded me of the forlorn Pink Motel in Michelle, the ghost town on the outskirts of Sparwood. I found a kopitiam Sin Yun Long and found a seat under the whirring ceiling fan to wait for my breakfast and checked my WhatsApp messages. Nothing. As I dove into my second cup of white coffee, I realized this was one of the rare moments I was alone on this trip. I loved the silence within me, amid the chaos of loud voices, cups kissing saucers, and motorbikes and cars honking outside. I was so tired. More than the traveling, it was because of the careful conversations I have had to have with family about the past, the unruly emotions I had to wrestle with in response to the discoveries and non-discoveries, all while repeating the unending cycle of diaper changes, feeding, and coaxing Leo into naps. John and I discussed the possibility that I was experiencing postpartum depression, but in my heart, I felt the heaviness was more than that. Ever since Leo was born, I had felt my mother's presence everywhere, like her essence was a heavy cape wrapped around my neck, dragging me down. I couldn't stop thinking about her. She came into my dreams, often appearing as the beautiful murky figure from my childhood, only to transform into a vampire-like creature with long, black hair. It was these compounding, overlapping, and troubling feelings about mother that led me to this kopitiam. I had to find her, even if I was not sure I could forgive her. I was going to follow my strongest lead and dive into the most enduring relationship that mother had not eviscerated. I stood up to greet Che Eng, my mother's best friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. That was lovely. Wayne, let's talk about Wayne Ying. He was born in downtown Toronto to Chinese immigrants who fed him a steady diet of bitter melons and kung fu movies. Wayne works as a school social worker in Ottawa, but lives to write, travel, eat, and play, preferably all at the same time. He's an award-winning author and travel writer who continues to push his boundaries from the Arctic to the Antarctic. His most recent novel, Letters from Johnny, was just shortlisted for Best Crime Novella 2022 by the Crime Writers of Canada. Congrats! Yeah. His next novel, The Family Code, comes out in 2023. And in 2018, his debut, Finding the Way, a novel of Lao Tzu, was released. So a warm welcome for Wayne.
Thanks, Julia. I was torn listening to Jamie because I'm a couple chapters behind what she just read, and I'm having a hard time putting the book down, so now I know she goes to Malaysia. I mean, I could see that happening, but you had to blow it for me, eh? Yeah. So, I was checking the baseball scores and doing all that. Anyways, I'm enormously happy to be here. Trish and I, we haven't been in Vancouver in 18 years. I know that's shameful. But we popped into this garden on our way to get married in Euclid, just outside of Tofino. So this place has a very special meaning to us. And to be invited to be part of this, I can't tell you how thrilled we are. And to be honest, I've been very jealous about the community here. If you come from Ottawa, you'll understand that. And it's not just because of geography and climate and food. It's all that too. But the epicenter of Asian literature is here. It's not in Toronto. It's nowhere else. We all know roads lead to Vancouver if you want to earn your keep in writing. So to be part of that is amazing. I know I'm supposed to read, but I hate reading, so I'm going to use up my 5 minutes. No, I will read. I do want to say you do things differently in Ottawa. My niece just moved here a few months ago, and her observations sort of reinforce what I've always thought. You do things differently here. The Asian vibe is very different. The counting game is very different. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, if you're racialized, you'll walk into a room and you start counting the number of people who look like you, right? And then you work your way to other groups, right? You don't have to play that here. Yeah, because you just don't have enough hands. In Ottawa, you only need a couple fingers, and that's if you don't count staff. So it's enormously affirming to be here, and I can only imagine what it's like to write in a community like that. The other vibe that's different here is what my niece called, you have Asian hipsters here. Yeah. So, and that to me says there's maturity, there's confidence, and there's history in this community, which, there's critical mass in Toronto, but there's also a mass of other voices, a cacophony of sounds and competing attentions. And you guys have a lock on it here, and it's wonderful. And you can, when you meet an Asian from Vancouver, they have that confidence. They just have a breeding that's different than, I think, some of the insecurities that somebody like me from Toronto might have. So, have I used up my 5 minutes? No? Okay. I tried to get away with that. So, Jamie and I aren't big fans of reading, but she does it so well, especially if you're reading her book. And one of the reasons why I've been hesitant to read is because my novel actually doesn't lend itself very well to oral reading, because it's epistolary form, it's letters, and it's from the perspective of an 11-year-old boy in 1970. If you've ever read the writings of an 11-year-old, it's not really readable, right? So part of my research was to read the writings of immigrant boys, second generation in immigrant schools. So the grammatic errors, the syntax, the sentence structure, it's really not readable. So I tried to replicate some of that early on in the book. So in the first 2 letters or entries, there are about 30 some odd errors, which you wouldn't hear because it's a visual experience. He crosses out how to spell Quebec 3 times before he still gets it wrong, things like that. It's because I wanted to convey the challenge and the emotion and the struggle of writing. And I thought one of the ways to do that was to actually write like an 11-year-old. Now, the entire book isn't like that because you would get frustrated after a while, because you do have to move on with plot and character, right? So Johnny's writing does improve dramatically once it becomes monetized by his best friend. So I will give you a quick read. And I thought there's no better place to start than the beginning. Sorry, I should have had that all prepared. Okay. September 21, 1970. Dear Pen Pal, my name is Johnny Wong. I am in grade 5 and go to Ord Street Public School, and I live in Toronto. Mrs. Clover is my teacher. She said I have to do a writing project, like write to a pen pal. She said a pen pal is like a best friend in a faraway place. She said she will exchange these letters with a grade 5 class in Idaho every month. I'm sorry, but I have a for real friend now. His name is Raleigh. He rents a room beside us, except we have the biggest room in the house, and we share the washroom and the kitchen with him and 2 university students in the room downstairs. Raleigh's rich. He says he's in the acquisition of fine things and buying and selling business, and he trades shiny things like forks and jewels and really old money. My mother likes that I have a friend who does not tease me. Raleigh is very kind. Sometimes I want to call him Dad, but my for real father is in Vancouver. It was Raleigh who gave me my first pack of hockey cards. Now I have 90 cards. Someday, I hope to get a Dave Keon rookie card. So, I do not need another friend unless you can make the new student Barry Arbo stop calling me names and getting me into trouble. So, if I could just, do I have time to deconstruct that? 30 seconds? So, one of the things I tried to do in this very short first entry is establish characters. So I've mentioned half of the characters in the book, even though they didn't have speaking lines. I've established setting and time, right at the top, September 21st, 1970, a month before something big happens in Canada. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't Google it, buy my book. I've tried to establish an emotional hook by showing him longing for his absent father, hungering for a friend and for his mother's approval, annoyance at another friend, and reinforcing a hockey backdrop, which is a big part of the book. And if you really want to read the next entry, then I've probably established what was the most important thing in the novel, and that's voice. Because capturing the voice of an 11-year-old and staying with an 11-year-old for 120 some odd pages, short read, it's a very, it sounds difficult, it sounds easy because it's just a boy, you know, writing letters. But every word, every nuance is there for a reason. So I hope you like it. All right?
Well, thank you. Yeah, so it's 22 Henry Street. That's where we lived when we first landed in Canada. And that's in the book, so I love that. Okay. Chuck Kwan. That's a very, very diverse person here. Chuck was born in Hong Kong, grew up in Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan. He's also lived in the US, Saudi Arabia, and Canada, and he speaks like so many languages. I'm so envious. He speaks English, Japanese, French, Cantonese, and Mandarin. And in 1978, Chuck co-founded the magazine Asianadian, which is dedicated to promoting Asian arts, culture, and politics within Canada. And I had the enormous pleasure of seeing his films. He did a 15-part documentary called Chinese Restaurants, which braids his personal experiences with his love of travel and appreciation for Chinese culture worldwide. And if you haven't seen it, can we see it? Like, it's available? Yeah?
It will be available.
Cool. Yeah, so I recommend it. It's so interesting. Latin Passions is a feature film from the television series, and that won the special jury prize at the 24th San Francisco International Asian American Film Festival. And today he'll be reading from Have You Eaten Yet? This book here. And that's published by Douglas and McIntyre. So let's hear something from there.
I apologize, I forgot my reading glass. So you have to make do with my squinting eyes. I'm going to read from the very first pages of the book, first page and a half. It's the introduction of to the book. The rain is coming down hard. I'm nursing a drink at a bar somewhere in the outskirts of Antananarivo, Madagascar, when a smallish Chinese man of dark complexion sits down next to me and starts making small talk in Mandarin. Where are you from? Where are you going? What's your name? By this time, I figured out that he's Cantonese, so I switched to our common dialect. What's yours? Ah, just call me Ah Wong, he says. Ah is a colloquial Chinese prefix used with a shortened form of someone's name, usually one syllable, to express familiarity, like my friends call me Ah Guan. Wong is a common Chinese family name, and there are tens of millions by that name in the world. What are you doing here? My turn to ask. Just prospecting here and there in the mountains. For gold, I'm curious. The island's central highlands are rich with precious metals, mineral deposits. Oh, it's a long story. I've been here for months, leaving soon. Wang is evasive. So, what is he really doing here? I've watched enough Hong Kong gangster movies to recognize this cagey dialogue. For all I know, he may not even be a Wang. Early in the evening, on my arrival from Johannesburg, I was picked up by Paul Lee Sing Chung. We drove for what seemed like an eternity on back roads through blinding rain, in the dark, to get to this bar. Paul is a Sino-Mauritian who has lived in Madagascar for 30 years. He's part owner, just for the fun of it, of this restaurant cum boarding house where I'm staying for the night. Let's eat, Paul says. Having traveled all day from Cape Town on the other side of the continent, I'm famished. The dinner is mouth-watering. We have Mauritian-style fried rice and the Creole classic rouget de boeuf, beef braised in a rich tomato sauce with onions, garlic, chilies, ginger, thyme, and coriander. At the end of the meal, Paul asks the kitchen for soup chinoise. Try this. This is the national dish in Madagascar, he says, pointing to the steaming bowl of wonton soup. There are two major cultural imports from China in the country. This is one of them. The other is the rickshaw that you'll see where you're going. Madagascar is one of the last places on earth I would expect to find Chinese settlement. And now I find out that wonton soup and rickshaws have contributed to the rich cultural tapestry here on the Big Island. Have you eaten yet? This colloquial Chinese greeting is akin to asking, "How are you?" in a culture where food plays such an important role in life. Asking if someone has eaten shows that you care. Because of war, famine, and poverty, people in old China did not always have enough to eat. Perhaps that is how these words became an expression of concern for someone's well-being. However, I'm having a problem with reading, but however it evolved, it's a greeting that you have here worldwide among people with Chinese heritage. And we are talking about worldwide. There's a Cantonese saying, "Yat walk zhao tian ngai," literally journeying to the sky's edge with a walk. You can find a Chinese restaurant everywhere you go. And the culture has morphed, becoming American, Cuban, Jamaican, Peruvian, or what have you. As Samson Ye in Kolkata told me when we were talking about Indo-Chinese food, we adapt to new surroundings, not the other way around. He might as well have been talking about the Chinese diaspora. Yeah.
So I'm going to start off the questioning with a few questions of my own, and then as I'm talking to them, you can think about what you would like to ask, and we'll turn to you very soon. So the first person I would like to ask a question of is Jamie. In her book, she's got for each, at the beginning of each chapter, she's got Chinese radicals. And the choice is interesting because she chose traditional Chinese script. And so I wanted to ask her to elaborate on why she made that decision.
Thank you, Julia, for asking that thoughtful question. So I played along a lot with the different kinds of ways that words appear on the page in the book. And to be blunt, I picked, the Chinese script as a way to interrogate and interrupt English speech, because I feel like English is a colonizing language for many of us in the diaspora, and that many of us have lost our language because of this colonizing power. And so I have these creeps, like these kind of reminders in every subject or section header, just to kind of remind us that of what we might have lost, of what we can gain, of what we still have. And the choice of using the Chinese radical in the traditional script is very political, I would say. I try to give weight and significance to the democratic aspirations of people in Hong Kong, to those that are fighting human rights in China. And it's thank you. And it's a nod to their efforts and also to the longevity of our language and our culture, that there was a script has endured centuries. And so, those tiny characters in every subject or every chapter heading play a really significant role for me. They represent what we've lost in colonization, what we have yet to gain by continuing to learn our language, and is a little bit of a move of resistance on my part to support the political movements that we are continually struggling through as a community.
Thank you, Jamie. Yes, as a Taiwanese, I really appreciate it. Okay, now Wayne, Toronto in the 70s, what made you decide to set your book there?
Well, let's say hypothetically I was live then and I knew that era. We'll start with that. All three of our stories are identity stories, right? It's about who we are, where we belong, and where we're going. I mean, Chuck's traveling around the world. He thinks he's, doing stories about food. It's a wanderlust. He's looking for himself. And, Lily, the character there, is trying to figure out who she is and where she's going. In the same way, 11-year-old Johnny is trying to figure out who he is. But in my story, identity doesn't have to be just about an individual. It could be about a community, it could be a city, it could be a nation. So I try and do all four in this short, thin little book. But in 1970, Toronto was wrapped around this Protestant ethos, called itself Toronto the Good. It was so bland. They should have called itself Toronto the Bland. But there was a lot happening beneath that veneer. I mean, there were the American draft dodgers, Chinese immigration had just exploded, and the community was evolving and changing. And I lived on Henry Street. Julia was my neighbor, unbeknownst to me. I was number 60. You're 20. I know 22. I know 22. Yeah, I don't remember it. Yeah. So Julia might remember. You knew where all the Chinese lived because they had carefully tended, neat little gardens, right, of vegetables. It was a student ghetto. American draft dodgers partied well into the night. And in the eyes of a child, everything is larger than life. I mean, Bazooka Joes, Mannix, Adam 12, Partridge Family, and hockey. I remember all that stuff really well. And I remember, I think, one of Canada's first 9/11 moments, and that was the FLQ crisis, which shocked and gripped the nation. My parents didn't speak English, but they read the Chinese dailies. And there were 3 Toronto English language newspapers as well. And every day it was a different headline. Teachers talked about it. My parents talked about it. You couldn't escape it. This was something that was in your face. And even as I was a little younger than the actual character in the book, I remember it really well. So it was a period of change for a boy on the cusp of adolescence. It was a period of change for the growing Chinese community. And it was a period of change for Toronto, which you'll find this hard to believe, but it was becoming quite self-absorbed. This is a work of fiction, right? And it was a period of change for Canada, which would be just swallowed in Quebec separatism for the next 2 generations. It still defines our politics, right? So I had 4 parallel but intersecting coming-of-age stories captured during the FLQ crisis. So I really honored the history behind it, so the dates and the actual events were as accurate as I could make it. And even the hockey scores were as true. I had a friend fact-check the Leaf Vancouver Canuck game, and yes, I had that right. But it doesn't look like much of a story, but there's a lot of tension beneath the humor. And a lot of people have read it. This was hilarious, Wayne, but there's a lot of tension, and maybe I'll try to weave that in at another point. But whether it was about race, I mean, there's a murder here, there's terrorism, there's Pierre Laporte's body found in the back of a car. There's all sorts of things that just sort of stop you, but parallel with the humor. So 1970 really stood out, assuming I was alive.
Yes. No, just pretend you were just not born
Right,
yet.
wasn't there.
Okay. Okay, Jamie, Chuck, my question for you is that you traveled all around the world and looked at Chinese immigrants everywhere. And what would you say distinguishes Canadian Chinese immigrants from the others?
That's a tough question. I'd rather not answer that first.
Okay.
I want to go back to your question to Jamie about the
Political.
language. I don't know if everybody knows, but Jamie and I knew each other professionally. Her as a lawyer, me as somebody who was working on a refugee from Hong Kong. And I was asking her guidance on some legal briefs. And that was 6 months or before she discovered that we were both writers, that we were both coming to LiterASIAN. So I had the same aspiration. There were 3 things I told my publisher that I would insist on. And that was before I had gone through the editing experience, so I have no idea what to expect from a mainstream publisher with mainstream editors looking at a Chinese Canadian narrative or global Chinese narrative. So my first insistence was that all the adjective use of double Asian, Canadian, Asian American has to be unhyphenated. And this was done, Associated Press did that 4 years ago, and New York Times did that 3 or 4 years ago, that you don't hyphenate an adjective use of like Asian American. That's the identity issue. The second thing I wanted to do is to make sure none of my foreign food names are italicized. So, like, what's to say that you italicize something and not the other one? Like empanada, most people don't italicize empanada because people know what empanada is. But how do you italicize something else that is deemed exotic, right? So what's exotic to you may not be exotic to me. So that's the italicization. And the third part was the Cantonese part. I insist that all my Chinese words are in its original form, or Hakka or Cantonese, and not rendered into Mandarin Pinyin, except for place names, because people have to look it up in the map. So you should at least put the Hakka, put the place names. So back to your question, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, because I don't see a difference. I mean, I went to 13 countries, and every one of the immigrants or the local born were all kind of living and working and growing up in a socially, culturally different environment than what their families are coming from. So they have to find a way to adapt. And to adapt that, and especially in food, when you're running a Chinese restaurant, the best way to adapt this is through your menu. You basically say, well, I'm making this super hot Sichuan dish. This is not going to work in Outlook, Saskatchewan. So I'm gonna have to taper it down and tone it down to the way where my customers would come in. So that goes to say, that talks about the whole migration experience, talks about whole integration and assimilation experience. And you can see that through food. So I don't see any difference how Chinese immigrants or local-born Chinese who have to live in within the mainstream, so-called mainstream culture, mainstream social environment, and you just have to do what you need to do.
Yes,
To
first
adopt.
generation.
Yeah, first generation, or even second or third generation. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to see how the next generations assimilate because a lot of intermarriage goes on, right? So different locations, different customs.
Yeah. The thing about assimilation is a two-way street. You know, it's not that I don't want to assimilate. It's that you don't want me to assimilate into your culture. So that's the kind of thing that is the acceptance of the mainstream society. You know, that's why we have Chinatown. It's ghettoization of Chinese settlement and saying, wow, you guys stay in one corner here. You know, I'm Panda guy, right? So it's all that kind of thing that it's not that Chinese don't want to move out of Panda Street, you know, Panda Street or around here. They want to move to Richmond. Yeah, they cannot afford it. So.
Yeah, I teach in Richmond, so Vancouver is actually now the most Asian city outside of Asia, right? So I look at my class and it's rare for me to see a white face now, actually, mostly Asians. Okay, so I'm going to ask Ellen, do you want to have the special guest now or should we do the questioning? Oh, okay, while he's deciding, anybody have a question for our three authors? Don't be shy, just put up your hand. Yes. Winnie.
Hi, Winnie.
When I first heard that you're going to write a book about having eaten, I thought, well, this is good. A lot of people thought you have exhausted the topic of Chinese restaurants. After you invested so much in this beautiful series, it's a fantastic series of films on Chinese restaurants around the world. We try to share that, and I have a plan to share a couple of episodes every year with different groups. I still haven't exhausted not 15 episodes. So my question to you is, what prompted you to write about on this topic after so many years? And then the second question is, what kind of satisfaction do you get from expressing yourself in this different language, meaning writing versus filming?
Well, the writing part all started here, literation. I've been friends with Jim Wong Chu for 40 years, and throughout, he was a big supporter of my film, as you know. He brought me out here 2 or 3 times, not as a writer, but as a storyteller. So, and he has always encouraged me to write. So that's how I got into writing. And I thought writing is another kind of media of expression, because Jim Wong Chu always told me that making a film is just like writing a book. You're just a storyteller, but different format. Like the last time I was here, one time I was here, I met Wong. He's the anime cartoonist who did a book on Chinese Canadian history. I mean, you can do a whole cartoon thing on Chinese Canadian history. You know, so that's a wonderful. You know, you're not writing a book, but you're doing a cartoon series about this thing. So I thought that was very, very interesting. Yeah, it's a tremendously satisfying. I'm a first-time writer. I never wrote before, so I thought there's a big difference between making a 25-minute episode and a 5,000-word chapter, which I try to limit myself to, and and you can do a lot of things with 5,000 words, and you can do a lot of things the movies cannot. You don't have the sound, you don't have the image, but you can delve deeper into history. I did a lot more research about why certain things happen that way, and so in that sense, it's another way of expressing or telling a story.
Okay. So I think Ellen's going to come up and introduce our guest. And thank you so much for all of the responses and for Winnie's question. I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but we might.
I think we'll definitely have more time. Well, thanks everyone. I just wanted to have a moment to introduce a good friend of mine and also a really important person for the city, because she is the poet Fiona Tinwei Lam, who is the City of Vancouver's Poet Laureate. And I've known Fiona for a number of years, so I'm really happy that Fiona, you can make it to the garden today to give a few words. But I want to introduce Fiona. Fiona Tinwei Lam has authored 3 poetry collections and a children's book, and produced several award-winning poetry videos that have been screened at festivals all over the world. Besides editing the anthology, The Bright Well, Contemporary Canadian Poems on Facing Cancer, Fiona has co-edited 2 non-fiction anthologies. Shortlisted for the City of Vancouver Book Award and thrice selected for BC's Poetry in Transit, Fiona's work appears in over 40 anthologies, including the Best Canadian Poetry series. A former lawyer, she has an MFA in creative writing from UBC. She currently teaches at SFU's Continuing Studies. Fiona will share with us a few words about the City's Poet Laureate program and also read a poem from her collection as well. Welcome, Fiona.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's so fabulous to see all of you here live after 2 hard years of the pandemic. And what a fabulous panel. What a great way to kick off this incredible festival, LiterASIAN. We heard from Wayne and from Jamie and Chuck. So diverse, so fascinating, a great, auspicious way to begin a few days of some wonderful panels and readings and workshops. So I'm really, really pleased to be here today, and I mean here at the Sun Yat-Sen Gardens. It's been an incredibly hard time for everyone in so many ways. I'm sure all of you would agree. And this particular block, this particular neighborhood has experienced really intense anti-Asian racism. Severe and horrific anti-Asian racism, violence, graffiti, all kinds of vandalism. And we're here back to claim this neighborhood back, to be a safe place for families and businesses and for communities of all kinds. In fact, it's such a historical neighborhood. There have been Chinese Canadians, of course, unhyphenated, Japanese Canadians, Jewish, Russian, Ukrainian, German, Scandinavian, you name it. All kinds of folks have come here. In fact, the white population was a minority at the turn of the century here. But through legislative restrictions and policies, they created a white dominant society, a whites only policy that came through immigration policy and other legislation. So I'm actually going to read 2 poems, one very, very short poem, and then a longer poem that sort of relates to some of the delicious things that Chuck was mentioning. So some of you may know that about restrictive covenants. Jamie, you know about those, right? Restrictive covenants are these special covenants that are placed on land titles, offices, on properties. And historically, there have been restrictive covenants placed on Vancouver's and other places too, properties that restricted properties to just whites. And I decided to do an erasure poem, and you can see what it looks like here. I got my mom's calligraphy brush and some ink. I'm not very good at using a calligraphy brush or ink, but I could do this. And I got a restrictive covenant, and I went through and created an erasure poem or a blackout poem. That's when you go through and you find words and you create a poem out of a text. And so I created this poem out of this text. And the restrictive covenant originally stated, "No poultry, swine, sheep, cows, cattle, or other livestock shall be kept on the premises. No person of the African or Asiatic race or of African or Asiatic descent, except servants of the occupier of the premises in residence, shall reside or be allowed to remain on the premises." And that's an excerpt of a restrictive covenant on a West Vancouver property that's similar to those still registered on thousands of properties across the country, across BC, across Vancouver, and so forth. They still exist. They're of no effect. They're null and void as of 1978, but they're still on the property. There was a group of high school students who had a very good teacher who told them that they could actually do as a project, remove a restrictive covenant on a property. And they went and they found a restrictive covenant on a property that was built in 1908 in Port Alberni. It was owned by Alan Webster Neal, a member of Parliament who supported the Indian residential school system and was a pro-Japanese internment person and also opposed Asian immigration. So they went and they spent money and they removed the restrictive covenant that I just uttered. And so with the blackout, this is what the very short poem, sounds like a haiku, says. No other, no race, all allowed. All of African or Asian descent shall reside, shall remain. All shall allow all to remain. So you can imagine what BC, what Canada would look like if we hadn't had the Exclusion Act, if we haven't had Japanese internment and repatriation, if we hadn't had all kinds of restrictions in our immigration regulations and laws, as well as these restrictive covenants. A very different society, a very much more multicultural, multiracial, blended, integrated society. What could have been? But on a more positive note, I just started my tenure in January as Vancouver's Poet Laureate for the next 2 years. I'm the 6th. And I've started out my tenure as with a contest, a city poems contest, to encourage people to write poems about the historical, cultural, and ecological sites in Vancouver, such as Chinatown and Japantown and so forth. And then next year there'll be video poems, a video poem contest that I'm hoping people will participate in as well. And the Laureate has its origins in the Greek mythology. Apollo was chasing after Daphne, the naiad nymph, and she wasn't really interested in him. And but he pursued her and stalked her, and he's about to catch up to her, about to seize her. And she called her dad, the river god Peneus, to turn her into something else to escape him. And she turned into a laurel tree. And Apollo, foiled, was very upset that he couldn't capture Daphne, but he honored and loved the laurel tree. And so now laurel leaves, you can imagine those Olympic athletes with those laurel crowns. Athletes from the Olympics and great musicians and poets and other politicians would be awarded the laurel crown. I haven't gotten my laurel crown yet, but I could get some bay leaves and string them together if I really wanted to. But in any case, so that's where the Laureate started, and the first Poet Laureate was in England in the 1600s. And that means that the government will give you maybe a couple $100 a year to come and do events and maybe write a poem or two. But in any case, so that's where the Laureate does, and every Laureate in Vancouver has done something different. We have a federal Poet Laureate, Louise Bernice Half, Sky Dancer, who's our First Nations Poet Laureate. I'm the second Chinese Canadian or Asian Canadian Poet Laureate in Vancouver. Evelyn Lau was the third Poet Laureate. I'm going to read a poem that some of you might relate to. My mouth was watering. I was going to read another poem, but then I heard Chuck reading about this tomato braised beef with all those herbs and spices, and I thought I have to read something else. And hey, we're close to Chinatown and delicious food here, so if you're hungry, you can head out afterwards and grab a steamed bun or something. And there's cake tonight too, right? There's a wonderful cake later this evening as part of the festival. The poem's called Rice. Curve upon curve, terraces ripple a valley with sheens of green, silver, gray, rhythmic seams undulating as if land were wave. Rice, for us, came from Chinatown. Rice came from stores. Rice came in a burlap sack, hauled and tossed into the car trunk like a sandbag, lugged upstairs to the kitchen, sheared open to release the cascade of white grains into a bin under the counter. Then scooped, triple rinsed, steamed in our ancient rice cooker with its rattling lid. The clicked switch signaled dinner. Steaming domes pillowed our bowls, mingled with stir-fry and stew, replenished again and again until the cooker was scraped to the bottom. My father's urgent quest through England, America, brushing past potatoes, bread, pasta, to hunt down Spartan cafes tucked in rundown blocks. He'd relish each mouthful as if haunted by ancestral hungers. Weeks without, my cravings start, and now my son's, as if nothing else can quell the yearning of his cells. Each lustrous mound, a homecoming. So have a wonderful festival, everybody.
Thank you so much, Fiona. You can stay up here longer if you want. I just didn't want her to run out of time because she was originally scheduled to be at the beginning. So, so we still have time for questions from the audience. If you have anything to ask our authors up here. Oh yes, Todd.
Hi. It was wonderful to see Jamie on Zoom at Word Vancouver. We talked to you as one of the newest emerging writers recipients of the new Lao Tzu Award. And we also talked with Madeline Steen, who was one of the first, and also an author. And so at that point, it was really nice to be able to ask you, if you have a question at the end of the talk, what would that be? Because, you got shown here focusing on food. You've got Wayne writing about the narrative and people. So please, if you are able to ask them, because I'm guessing you know them from Ottawa, Ontario.
Yeah.
Put you on the spot.
I know. It's well, thank you for that opportunity. I think I'm the newest writer on the block, and I wondered if you could give advice about what it means to have a long artistic career or a long literary career while balancing all the other demands of your life. So, I don't know. Chuck, do you want to?
I think Wayne is better to ask that. I'm also a first-time writer. I can't tell you anything.
But you've been you've produced art for a long time.
No, I think Wayne can.
Oh, okay. There's no balance. Yeah. I think the pathway to publication can be fierce. It's a journey through a valley of rejection, but also a journey of self-discovery. And if we've talked about this, Jamie, you don't want to be one and done. Yeah. Because if you read her stuff, there's potential, and if you want a pathway, not just the publication, but to improve your craft, to be serious as a writer, you need to be committed. You need to be disciplined. You need to be focused. I started writing in the late 90s. I was single at the time. I was probably trying to meet people. I'm sure I was. I'm married now, so it worked. But I didn't take it all that seriously. I joined a group of other writers who were far more committed to it. They were writing novels when I was still doing short stories. I got the odd short story published, won a few contests, but I didn't have that commitment. I didn't have that focus. One of my colleagues, Amy, you did a launch, or you did a reading with her. She's just signed a 4-book deal with an American publisher, and she's so committed, and she's focused, and she's a mother, but her writing schedule is fierce. She starts early in the day. She takes time off work. She has a level of commitment that I never dreamed of until fairly recently. And then I tasted success. You're tasting success. Chuck, I can't believe that's your first book. Like, yeah, I read Condé Nast Traveler all the time, and your stories belong in a magazine like that. You know, like, you all have the ability to write, but it's what's the next book going to look like, right? So, but now I've also tasted success, and it's wonderful. I love it. But my wife will tell you that's all I do. Okay, I mean, I have a full-time day job, but I don't have a lot of balance. There's not an easy answer. You know, do you want to be published now, or do you want to be published later? How hard do you want to work at this? You know, I have a friend who self-publishes, and for him, that's fine. You know, he writes Victorian romances. He's this European immigrant, and like, really? You write Victorian romances? He's making hand over fist money, and to him, that's important. You know, he's not concerned about craft. He's getting published. So, I don't know. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
That's a hard question.
So it's you know, it's a creative. If you write to meet somebody or to be published, your motivation is very differently. If you write because you're committed to craft, you have a creative itch, and it makes you feel whole. Don't worry about publication. Just write for the joy of it. Yeah, and that's. Anything that I've enjoyed writing, it's because I felt I had something to say, something I wanted to do. And I've got all these projects lined up because I really believe in them. You know, and whether they get published or not, it's incidental. Sure, we all want commercial success, but like, I don't feel right if I'm not writing, or if I'm not thinking about writing, or if I'm not listening or talking to other writers or consuming podcasts, because it becomes a way of life. It's great.
If I can abuse my position, I'm going to ask Chuck a question. Reading your book, I felt like there was a lot of similarities in the dishes that we talked about in our book, and I wanted to ask you, you know, a lot of people ask me this question about what's authentic, and I have a lot of feelings about this and viewpoints strong, but I want to hear from you. Like, how do you answer that question when people ask you, you know, what's authentic Chinese cuisine now that you've like eaten it all over the world, and how do you answer that question when people ask you that?
There's no easy answer. I come to the conclusion that authenticity is what you actually grew up with. You know, if you know, your food and my food, Singapore hawker food, that's authenticity to me, right? Like, to this day, I cannot find a single satay restaurant or stall outside of Singapore that satisfy my feeling for what a satay should be. That's how bad it is, right? So to me, that's authentic, and I put it in definition as, you know, like the you know, Italians talk about grandmother nonna cooking, and you know, it's whatever cooking you grew up with, and no demeaning to any, say, Chinese Canadian food like sweet and sour chicken ball. I mean, that's what you grew up with. That's authentic to you. I mean, never mind what other Chinese might say about sweet and sour chicken balls, right? So it's not that kind of thing. And I have a story here that a lot of people may not know, but General Cho's chicken is not Chinese. It's New York. It's invented by a Chinese guy in New York. And then I was living in Hong Kong with my wife, and we ordered General Cho's chicken. I thought, for a long time, wow, this is so Chinese, because General Cho's chicken General Cho is a very famous personality back in you know, dynastic days of China. And then if you go to General Cho's chicken, General Cho's village, you'll never see. The people have no idea what you're talking about. So that's authenticity. It's a New Yorker Chinese dish, right? So it's that kind of how do you say that, comparative wise. And I would advise everybody not to stop thinking about authenticity. I think that's the best answer I can give you.
I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Are there more questions from the audience? Yes?
My question is, excuse me, for Wayne. In the 1970s, so many things happening. I guess the question is, why did you choose Dave Keon? And also, is Dave Keon aware?
Is he still alive?
He is. I shouldn't assume that people know who Dave Keon is because this is not the center of the universe. That would be Toronto, right? Or everybody knows who Dave Keon is. He was voted the greatest Toronto Maple Leaf of all time.
Wow.
So every boy needs somebody to look up to. But I think a male role model is really important to a boy. And in the novel, Johnny doesn't have that because his dad's absent, and I think I established that pretty quickly in the first letter. So, you know, he watches TV. You know, he's obsessed with Mannix and all these cop shows and superheroes, but none of them are tangible, of course. And not that Dave Keon is either, but he's flesh and blood. He is somebody who represents really healthy male paternal values, you know. He's fair, sportsmanlike. He's decent. He's a pacifist. He's humble. So he's all the things that Johnny wishes that he had with a male role model. And so he writes to Dave Keon like I did as a child too. I did have a father, but I was pretty hockey mad as well. So I used Dave Keon because he represented all those things, all the things that were lacking, and all the things that we love about, many of us value about what a man should be. So, I wrote to Dave Keon. He didn't write back, but I didn't have a stamp on my letter, so I didn't write back as I was hurt, not realizing that you needed a stamp. But I started to write to him again last year. Okay. And the internet is great for tracking people down unless you're the one being tracked down. Yeah. So I tracked him down and I wrote him a letter and I said, oh, you know what? I don't know if I should share this. No.
Yes, please.
No, you know what? There's the perception of Dave Keon, everything that I've described you is true. That's all I'm going to say. And if I say anything beyond that, it would be like kissing and telling. I would be compromising a relationship that I have with him. He's too decent a guy. This is my thing with him. But there's reasons he's the greatest Leaf of all time, not just because he was a fantastic hockey player. He still is a wonderful human being.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, I'll jump in. If I were to ask you, someone wanted to understand the Chinese diasporic experience, who are 3 authors that you might want to read? Think hard.
I can go first.
3.
Okay,
I invite you to look at the back of my book, and there are 4 wonderful women who gave me a really nice blurb for my book, but I approached them because I really admire their work, and they are Catherine Hernandez, the author of Scarborough, Carrie-Anne Leung, author of The Wondrous Wu, Jenny Hei-Jen Wills, author of Older Sister, Not Necessarily Related, and Lindsay Wong, author of The Woo Woo, How I Survived Ice Hockey, Drug Raids, Demons, and My Crazy Chinese Family. And so 2 of these authors wrote nonfiction, 2 wrote fiction, and I really admire these women, not just for their writing, but for their, their boldness, for their bravery, and for the fact that they are, collegial, wonderful Asian women that are really kicking ass in the world right now. And I'm proud to be among their community. And so really, I read their work, admired it, and I'm, just thrilled that they agreed to give me a blurb on the book. And I would just say that I wholeheartedly encourage you to also, if you haven't already, get acquainted with their work.
Yeah, it's wonderful that there's a whole generation of very active writers that are Asian Canadian. It's a great time if you're wanting to write. This is the right moment, I think. Okay, Wayne or Chuck?
Well, speaking of a generational change, I think I'm going to go backwards a little bit and just mention somebody that everybody knows and is familiar with, and that would, of course, be Wei-Sin Choi. And I could mention Jay Peeney, but I'm going to reference All That Matters. And I know many of you have read him and read that quiet, gentle story that pays homage to the struggles of early immigrants who stood together, persevered, adapted, illustrating the strength of family bonds. The whole book is humble, as is everybody in there. It resonates for me because for those who've been here for at least a couple of generations, I mean, he's talking about, many of our family stories, right? Fiona mentioned the Head Tax Exclusion Act, and many of our families went through that. And he chronicles that. So from a sociological, cultural, and historical perspective, as well as being just a great story, it's a must-read to understand the Chinese diaspora. I hope all my nephews and nieces someday pick it up. Nowadays, I think they're more interested in other things. They're actually more likely to read yours, Jamie, and some of the authors that you've listed, because some of the old stuff is just it's a footnote in history to them, and they don't quite get it. But for me, I love history, and it's meaningful for me. Number two, I'm going to second Lindsay Woo Lindsay Wong, the Woo Woo. Her story is everything that Wei-Sin's isn't, but is just as captivating because there's nobody heroic in it, all right? The family is completely messed up, dysfunctional, it's dark, it's funny, it's honest, it's not quiet, all right? It's in your face. These are not role model, daughters and parents. They're heroes because they eventually persevere and survive, but it's not the classic Chinese trope of what families are. And I don't use trope in a pejorative sense. I just mean it's a different portrayal of Chinese families, because not all of our families, came up like Wei-Sin's and families holding together. Lindsay Wong's was a real challenge, and I have so much respect for somebody who can air her family laundry like that and just sort of like complete vulnerability. And that's what a lot of current readers like, that sort of intimate sort of voice, and Lindsay captures that really, really well. The last writer that I want to speak to isn't Canadian, but for me it's must read, Charles Yu, Interior Chinatown. It's an important read because it speaks to escaping the invisibility, the facelessness that's pre-assigned to many Asians, and the genericness which Hollywood and popular culture have always portrayed us. And he writes it in a bold, daring, satirical way that I've never read. It's completely meta. It transcends novels in that it's two fictional worlds going on at the same time. He's a screenwriter. He worked on Westworld and a number of other things, but a brilliant read, and relates to the Chinese diaspora in that, I mean, there's a lot of history in it, but there's so much of our history is about being invisible. And he puts it out there on the table, and he challenges that notion, and he forces us to think and laugh and cringe at the same time, and I love that.
If I can just second Wei-Sin Choi, I would not be sitting here today without Wei-Sin Choi. It is one fateful dim sum, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, where he actually introduced me to the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop. I didn't know it existed. And then looking up on my phone with Paul Yee, when the Asian Canadian Writers Workshops
John Jim Chu Emerging Writers Award deadline was, and it was 2 weeks from the date I was having dim sum. I was sitting there with them going, it's due in 2 weeks. And they're like, well, you said you had your manuscript done. And I was like, well, and the rest is history. So, you know, I do have to say it was like a thrill to meet him. He's kind and humble as much as his writing. And I think that was a highlight of my career, honestly, just the fact that he's part of the beginning of my journey and how I came to this community. So, yeah.
Recent choice, the obvious. I have two other. Denise Chong, who did wonderful job with non-fiction, fiction. I think that's the best way to put down her for her concubines, the Chinese concubine. Third one was Fred Wah, poet. I was so impressed with Diamond Grill, about him growing up in Diamond Grill, and it's a lot of that are very personal prose. And I was most impressed, and this goes back to identity. As you may not know, but Fred is only 1/8 Chinese, or one quarter, 1/8 Chinese. I think 1/4 maybe, and he doesn't look like a Chinese. So, but then he talks about, in one chapter in his Diamond Grill, he talks about this name Wah. And as you know, Wah is a very Chinese name. So he talks about this anecdote about booking an air flight with Air Canada, and the booking agent is joking with him, Wah, you're going, where are you going, Wah? You know, and then then he goes on a 5-page about, when you're carrying a Chinese name, it never leaves you. You're always being kind of racialized, stereotyped, even though you may not look like a Chinese. You don't speak the Chinese language, and that's and the same thing with if you were Italian, it doesn't matter. You know, if you call Fibonacci, doesn't matter. You get accepted right away as Canadian. But if you're Wah, then say, well, are you Canadian? Your English is so good. You know, where are you from? It's very personal to me, because I'm married to my Dutch wife, and then my son is half Chinese, and now he's married to an Irish woman. So my grandkids are now quarter Chinese, but they still stuck with name Kwan. So, which is, depending how you look at it, and that's the way people are going to treat you. They're always looking at you as a Chinese when you're only a quarter Chinese.
So that leads to a question: what do you see as the problems facing the future generation of Chinese descendants? Okay, maybe I'll turn to the audience if you don't want to answer that one.
Well, I can answer that one. I have a lot to say about this. I mean, my bread and butter is about, criticizing the government on its immigration law and policy. I can spend hours talking about this, frankly, but I'll just say this. I think that, law and public discourse play a huge role in how people experience belonging, how people experience community, how people are treated. It is very tiring to constantly tell people that you're born in Canada or that you've been here for X number of years. And I think, I've written at length about the fact that race is, the underlying factor in terms of how law is shaped, how people talk about people, and who feels like they're kin or community members. And I think, we're coming out of a pandemic where it became extremely stark for people, their daily experience, as Fiona captured, even here in Chinatown. It has not diminished, it has not gone away. And for someone like me who grew up watching my parents go through a lot of racism, I grew up thinking it's because my parents have an accent. It's because we were living at this time. And I thought I would escape that, and I can honestly say that I haven't. And for me to sit here in 2022 and face the same kinds of issues about race, to watch my colleagues who wear hijabs or who practice the Muslim faith, experience violence on a a daily basis at work or in public, it's a disturbing time. And so I would just say that I think we all need to be aware of that. We need to be brave. We need to speak out. And I really admire the people that are doing that work. And if you end up following me on social media and things like that, I hope you don't tire from my criticisms and my constant rants, because I think it needs to be said and it's not said enough. And that, I find solace in communities like this where we can gather and speak openly about these things. Anyways, I'm getting ranty now, but I just want to say that there's a lot of room for improvement, and that I see a lot of important work happening in various communities, and I applaud that. And Chuck talked about the fact that we've known each other for a few months now, not knowing that we were going to be sitting on this panel together. Chuck's doing important work in the community. We're talking about how, people coming from Hong Kong are treated differently in the immigration system than other people. It's the little things that we do, and the kinds of community work that we do behind our public facades. You know what I mean? And so I really take solace in all of these small efforts and these relations that we have. So, anyways.
I want to follow up on that, especially your point about being brave and speaking out. When I moved to Ottawa from Toronto in the early 90s, the loudest, the most vocal and assertive racialized group were East Africans, right? From Eritrea, Ethiopia, Djibouti. They were louder than I'd heard any newcomer or established racial group speak, and they got things done. People listened, and I thought that was fantastic, and I still use that as an example today. But it makes me, it also makes me a bit sad, because my roots go back 110 years, and we would never have said things like that, the way these East Africans did. We just would not have asserted ourselves. And I thought long and hard about, why do we, in comparison to other groups, appear quiet, right? And when I was researching my first novel, because it's set in ancient China, Finding the Way, I wonder it's because Chinese history is based on authoritarian rule. There's just not a lot of room for free will, right? Except there have been at least 20 historical uprisings and rebellions in Chinese history, and in Japanese history even more. So it's not baked into our DNA, okay? Maybe it's baked into the immigration experience, though, because that's completely different. I'd love to be able to hear other people's views on that another time, I understand. But there's a silence to us sometimes, and I may not make a lot of friends by saying this, but it magnifies the bullseye on our back. It implies acquiescence, and it implies that we're collaborating with the system sometimes, which is why I think, like Jamie says, sometimes we need to be brave and we need to speak out. And then there's some people who think, well, what's wrong with collaborating with the system? I mean, like, Asian representation in popular culture is fantastic nowadays, right? You turn on Netflix, any streaming, movies, and we've never seen so much Asian content before, and that's wonderful. It is so encouraging. But at the same time, the amount of anti-Asian hatred that's happened, it barely merits a ripple where I'm from, and that bothers me as much as the actual violence. The fact that I thought people would have our back, would speak out. So to me, the message is, let's celebrate our achievements, but let's not take anything for granted. And it hurts sometimes to speak out, and I know there are people in here who already do that. And you'll always have room at my dinner table for doing that, because I know how hard it is. I've done it in Ottawa, where you play that counting game and I stop at 1, because that's me, all right? And it's very lonely. But you have strength in numbers here, and you have critical mass, and that's why I'm envious, and I'm jealous of the strength and the solidarity that Jamie's talking about, just being here. I couldn't say this in Ottawa, because I'd be squirming, and I'd know people would be rolling their eyes. There goes Wayne again. But we need to speak out, even when it hurts, even if it appears to go against what we were taught. And because not everybody's going to do that for us.
Chuck, do you have anything to add, or?
No, but a lot of my stories about refugees. I have Vietnamese boat people. I have a man who walked from China through the Himalayas into Pakistan. And I have a couple who swam out of China during the Cultural Revolution days to Macau, and then eventually to Brazil. So that refugee topic came up a lot during my media interviews, and I would point to the fact that, well, we're welcoming Syrian refugees and Afghan refugees, and sort of point to the fact that it's no different from 50 years ago. We're still doing a lot of refugees acceptance. But little did I know that this was like when my book was first launched in end of January, February, and then of course then came the Ukraine. And now you're seeing a little bit of that kind of racism in there. Suddenly Ukrainians, refugees are, no limit to numbers coming in. But meanwhile, the veterans group are clamoring every day for government to let in the Afghan interpreters because they're stranded in Ukraine, they're stranded in Afghanistan. And then we're dealing with IRCC. Every day we deal with IRCC. But same thing, Hong Kong people. Why aren't you... What's wrong? Oh, we need to make sure they're not spies. Make sure they're not spies coming in. I mean, give me a break. Yeah.
So, well, that's a good note to end things on, because you guys have been so inspiring, and your passion shows through, and your dedication to craft. So we really, really thank you for being here at this festival. And thank you to the audience for coming and for asking good questions. We're going to now have author signings, and then you can enjoy the rest of whatever day you've got left. Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are like a sister from another mister and a brother from another mother. That was...